Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today to talk about supporting children as they develop their sense of self in virtual, hybrid, and physically distant learning formats. My name is Stephanie Adams, and I'm a Stream and 3 curriculum coach with the University of Virginia.
And hey, everybody, I'm Caitlin Powell, and I'm an early childhood project associate with UVA. So in preschool, children are rapidly developing their own perceptions of themselves as individuals. They define and describe themselves in terms of their physical attributes, their skills, their interests, their behaviors, or associations that they might consider the most important about themselves. They're also developing an understanding of their own interests and beliefs and their gender, race, and culture, and how that may be similar or different to other people. So when children are supported to value and appreciate diversity and differences in those around them, they can better understand and embrace diversity. And when children develop a positive sense of self, they also become confident, capable, and emotionally strong, which helps them to build really strong foundations for future learning and development. Children's development of their sense of self is heavily influenced by how trusted adults respond to them. And that's where you come in. Teachers can help children to develop a positive sense of self by noticing and acknowledging children's unique attributes, preferences, thoughts, and talents, and by providing a nurturing environment filled with acceptance and respect. Supporting development of sense of self in a virtual and hybrid or a physically distanced in-person learning format will definitely look a little bit different than it has in previous years. But there are many ways that we can adapt some of the things that you've always done. So today we're going to focus in on 3 specific strategies to help children develop a positive sense of self. And we'll share ways to adapt how to work in our new settings, whether you're virtual, hybrid, or in person. And our 3 strategies for today are to acknowledge and affirm physical attributes, interests, and characteristics, promote child autonomy, and embrace similarities and differences. As we walk through these strategies, you can take notes, you can jot down any ideas, and after you watch, make sure you use that accompanying guide, which will help you reflect, connect with others, and plan to support children's sense of self.
So let's jump into our first strategy for supporting children's sense of self, which is to acknowledge and affirm physical attributes, interests, and characteristics. Children are always taking in messages about who they are from all different directions. They're hearing it from adults and peers. They're getting a sense from television and the movies they watch, and even books. Children need our help, really, though, to make sense of their identities, both their personal identities and also their social and their group identities. We can help them do that by acknowledging and affirming their developing sense of self, by commenting on their physical attributes, on their interests, and on their personal characteristics. So one way to do that is to show children that you see them and value them by spending quality time together. You could schedule one-on-one time with children in any setting, but it might be a little trickier in virtual or hybrid settings. But it's really important because in order to understand who a child is and help them develop their sense of self, you have to regularly spend time with them to get to know them as individuals and to help and to get to know more about how they see themselves. No matter where you're teaching from, you can spend time reading a book together, playing games, drawing pictures, having meals, snacks, or playing outside. During your quality time, you can carefully watch and listen to children to learn more about how they see themselves. And then you can acknowledge and affirm their developing sense of self by saying things like commenting on their physical attributes. You could say, you have curly black hair and brown eyes, or yes, your skin color is the same as that peach crayon. If you wanted to comment on their choices or their interests, you might say, you chose to play that fishing game again. I think you really like that game. Or, you chose pretzels instead of crackers for snack. If you wanted to comment on their characteristics, you could say something like, thank you for picking those up. You're so helpful. Or you keep trying when things are tough. You are very determined and persistent. I love those words. You can keep track of your quality time to ensure that every child spends some time with you, and you can make adjustments to the frequency or the amount of time you're spending with each child. This would be to make sure that they're getting what they need. Remember, it's okay for some children to get more time, acknowledgement, and affirmation from you than others. Our goal is always to support each child equitably, not equally, which again just means that everybody gets what they need, but not everybody gets the exact same thing. Another opportunity to acknowledge and affirm children is through planned group activities. Many children love songs and games in any setting, so they can be engaging and creative ways to offer you time to acknowledge and affirm children while having fun. There are a couple of activities that I think would be good for this. One is to sing or do affirmation songs and cheers. So you can use songs and cheers to affirm children's sense of self. And you could do this by prompting them to say something positive about themselves and then add their words to the cheer. So Caitlin, give me a characteristic or an attribute about yourself.
Let's see. I like to think that I'm pretty funny.
Okay, so an affirmation chant might sound like 2, 4, 6, 8. Caitlin's funny and that is great. Or you could sing I'm glad to be me in the tune of happy birthday to you and give each child the turn to say something, nice about themselves or good about themselves, something that they love. Another way to do this is to do an activity called It's Good to Be Me. And for this activity, it's kind of the same idea, except you would have children share something that they're proud of or that makes them special. It can be something that they've accomplished or a character trait. And you could do this during circle time or transitions. You could highlight just one child a day or multiple children a day. And it's really fun. It gives them a chance to talk about themselves. And you might hear some children sharing things about like their new possessions, like they might have new toys or new shoes that they want to talk about instead of a personal characteristic. And that's fine because you can gently over time turn the conversation towards something more internal about who they are. The last thing I just want to say about acknowledging and affirming children's identity is that we want to make sure that children and their identities are positively and accurately represented in their learning environment through books and images and dolls and activities. When children can see themselves in and feel connected to their learning environment, they feel like they really belong there. And we want to provide learning materials that they can relate to because we want to affirm that children are they are valued, and we want to communicate how significant who they are, their identities are. Imagine how proud you would feel if your teacher read a story and the character looked like you. But also on the other hand, imagine how left out you would feel if it was time to draw self-portraits and you couldn't find a crayon that matched your skin tone. We really want to evaluate our learning environments, and you could do this both virtually and your physical classroom, just to ensure that every child in your class is positively represented so that we can support them to develop a positive sense of self.
Thank you, Stephanie. A lot of really great ideas there. All right, so let's get into our second strategy, which is to promote child autonomy. Promoting autonomy is a strategy that is so super important, and it cuts across so much of early childhood development. And when we promote autonomy, we give children choice and voice, and we push them to be active agents in their own learning and their own development. And so now specifically in thinking about the development of positive sense of self, there's a few things that we're going to want to talk about. First, in promoting autonomy, we can consider the totality of children's identities, interests, and abilities as we think about what topics we're going to choose, activities we're going to do, materials in the room. And there's some examples that I'd like to share with you. So in one instance, we can imitate their play. So by saying something like, oh, you like racing the cars. Can I race the cars with you? We can also be flexible. So I could say something like, you really do not like those blocks and you would rather play with those blocks. Okay, I'll come with you so we can go get them. When we think about materials and activities, we can also really intentionally plan book readings to promote autonomy and to avoid reinforcing stereotypes in what children may like or how they may act. I always think about this great book called Pink is for Boys, where the message of that story is that boys and girls can like or wear whatever colors they want. And messages like this can go well beyond the book and well beyond colors to support all children to play and behave and think in any way that is really true to their own sense of self. Another way to promote autonomy can be to let children have a say in what happens in the classroom, which really lets them know that you value their individual ideas and interests. And so to do this, we can do things like offering choices. We could say, where would you like to play in the room today? Or what should we sing today? What should we read today? And then last, with promoting autonomy, we can provide opportunities for children to share their ideas, to promote equity in social situations. And so another book reading example, there might be an unfair situation happening, and we can empower children in those moments by drawing attention to the situation and then prompting them to talk about how they think things could be more fair or more just. So with empowering children, we could say something along the lines of, in this part of the story, someone said that she could not be in the class play because she didn't look exactly like the character, and that doesn't seem fair. Let's share ideas, that we could include everybody. Promoting autonomy is central to supporting a positive sense of self, and it actually ties right into our last strategy, which I think Stephanie is ready to bring us home with.
Yeah, so our last strategy is to embrace similarities and differences. It's really important that children understand that people are simultaneously the same and different from one another. We can be alike in some ways and different in other ways, and our message to children is that's wonderful. We want children to seek out and value people's similarities and differences in lots of meaningful ways. And I say that because sometimes in preschool, we celebrate differences in our backgrounds and cultures with brief lessons that can maybe sometimes feel disingenuous, or it might only happen really around the holidays. That's really popular. But we can embrace similarities and differences all the time and in really lasting ways. And some teachers might wonder, if it's okay to talk to children about the ways that people are different. And the answer is a resounding yes. Lots of studies have shown that by the age of 2, many children have already begun to notice and become curious about the ways that people are different from one another. So it's important that we help them understand that diversity and appreciate it. One way to think about it is to see activities and materials as either being mirrors that reflect children's identities back to them, or windows that offer a look into other people's lives. So we really want to balance the activities and the materials that we're doing with children in all settings so that they reflect children's lives and also expand their worldview at the same time. So there are a couple of different ways you can do that. One way is just by talking with children about similarities and differences. Specifically, it's better not to shy away from talking about physical differences between people, whether it be their skin color or body shape or physical abilities. We really want teachers to be open and to comment about ways that people are alike and different, because it helps children learn and use the accurate language that's appropriate for describing people. And it also helps them develop respect and warmth and confidence when it comes to talking about diversity. So in the classroom, you might say something like, with Caitlin and I, like, Caitlin, your hair is straight and blonde, and my hair is curly and dark, and, our hair is different. And we both have hair that, can reach our shoulders. What's your favorite way to wear your hair? You can start conversations about that just to show that it's okay to talk about how we're different. You could listen to music or make or view art that helps children embrace similarities and differences. You could say something like, let's listen to 2 versions of the song. We'll listen to one performed by an American musician and another performed by a Jamaican musician. And after, we can talk about the ways that they sound similar and different. With art, you can talk about how some children used glitter and paint and others used markers, and how wonderful that looks, and how variety makes our rooms and our lives more interesting and better. Another way to support children to embrace similarities and differences is to plan activities around them where children can learn and appreciate all of the different ways that they are similar to and different from their peers and also from you. These activities that I'm going to pull up are great for virtual, hybrid, and in-person learning environments. And they can also be done with small groups and large groups of children. So one activity that comes to mind is whatchamacallit. It's a game where you could work in pairs or as a group and have children, discuss the different words that they call people in their family or clothing or foods or places. So it would sound like, Caitlin, what do you call your grandparents?
On my father's side, I call them Nunu and Bumpa.
I love that. That's different than what I call my grandparents. I call my grandfather Papa, and my grandmother, we call her Granny. But we both have grandparents and we just use different words. And isn't that neat? That would be the message that you would send to children when you're talking about the different things the different words we use for calling things in our lives. Another idea kind of in a similar way is called partner talk. And in that you would just invite children to turn to a peer and you would ask them a question about their life, allowing time for both children to share, and then also time for children to turn and talk to the whole group about what they've talked about. So you could provide a question or a prompt like, what's your favorite food? Or what did you do this weekend? And then as children share with a large group, you could just extend their conversations just by summarizing, how everybody's responses were similar and different in many ways. You could also, like Caitlin said, read books that highlight similarities and differences. I really like the story called Same, Same, But Different. And it's a beautiful book that follows two children who live in different parts of the world, and they communicate. They send letters and pictures back and forth, and they show their lives and their families. And it's just really cool to see how the children, by the end of the story, spoiler alert, how by the end of the story, they discover that their lives are the same in so many ways and different in so many other ways. Just talking together and reading books and fun games and activities just show children that diversity can bring us together. They can bring us lots of joy and they can just make our lives better.
I couldn't agree more. Thank you, Stephanie. Okay, so to recap, we have shared 3 strategies today for helping children to develop a positive sense of self. And those are to acknowledge and affirm physical attributes, interests, and characteristics, to promote child autonomy, and to embrace similarities and differences. Ross Thompson, who is a distinguished professor of psychology at UC Davis and also the director of the Social Emotional Development Lab, he had this great quote, and I pulled it to share with you all. And he said that it's remarkable the effect that an early childhood educator can have on a child's sense of self. And then he goes on to say that children at this very early stage are absorbing implicitly a sense of themselves by how educators act in relation to them and with them and alongside them in relationship with them. All of this to say that you really matter in all that you do to support children to develop a positive sense of self. Thank you so much for joining this presentation today. And remember that this webinar is just intended to be a conversation starter. So please use that accompanying guide as you take the time to reflect, connect the ideas to your own work, and to collaborate with others to support children to develop a positive sense of self. For more information about supporting sense of self and all of the early childhood initiatives, you can check out our website at ecevirginia.org. Thanks so much and take care.